What is going on YouTube? My name is Josh Frink, your favorite professional Pokemon TCG player, coming at you today with another tier list video, this time for the Lille Regional Championships taking place this weekend over in France. It's looking to be a very exciting tournament. We just had the Louisville, Kentucky regionals, and those results are looking to very quickly turn over into a European metagame, which is bound to be exciting. We have very little recovery time between these two majors, and a lot went down in Louisville. First and foremost, Caleb Gardevoir was able to win with Raging Bolt with an exceptionally large number of Bravery Charms, fundamentally changing quite a bit of the archetype's matchups into other decks. And Michael Davidson was able to take second place with that Lost Zone box, an archetype that many people were expecting to be dead. That archetype capitalizing on a low play rate of Regidrago VSTAR, as well as a small number of Manaphy inclusions in decks. So going into this tournament, I'm expecting Raging Bolt to stay back on top of the meta in terms of play rates. It won the tournament. It was already the #1 most played deck. I expect absolutely nothing to change that at that point. I do expect Lost Box to become a player once again, and I do think a lot of decks are going to start to include Manaphy back in their lists. Now that there are more bench sniping threats, I expect to see more and more Manaphy, and I do think that that is going to impact the metagame quite a bit. So we're just going to start off going in order here. I've got lots of different archetypes at the bottom, and we're just going to start with Raging Bolt, which I am going to put in A tier. I got lots of complaints about Raging Bolt in B tier in the last video, but I didn't feel in good conscience that I could put it higher than B tier when it had been a top play for so long in terms of play rate, but it still had really struggled to get past that top 8 finish at a regional. So now that it's won, now that we've sort of seen Grant Manley and Caleb Gardevoir and Xander Perot sort of adapt this archetype that a lot of people thought was solved with this heavier Bravery Charm sort of build, I do expect Raging Bolt to be quite a bit better. It has quite a bit better of a matchup into plenty of the things that you would expect to be worse matchups. The charms help into Charizard Pidgeot, they help into Terapagos Dragapult, they are quite good into Palkia Dusknoir, which was another standout deck from Louisville. So I am expecting a lot of success from Raging Bolt this weekend, but I am also expecting quite a lot of opposition to the archetype, given the fact that it did so well, that it was played by so many respected players. So it's going to hang out in the A tier for now. Moving on to Charizard Pidgeot, this is going to be my first S tier pick for the day. Talk about the large meta adaptations from Louisville, and Charizard is one of the decks that can the most easily slot in pieces to deal with some of these things, right? Charizard can easily play Jamming Tower or Lost Vacuum to help against that Raging Bolt. Historically has a very good matchup against that Raging Bolt. It can very easily slot in Manaphy to have a better matchup against something like Lost Box. And while we might see a bit of an increase in Regidrago play just as a result of Lost Box's success, we also saw Raging Bolt with Bravery Charms win the tournament, and that is Regidrago's single worst matchup in the meta. So I personally am expecting a lot of good things out of Charizard this weekend. I think it's finally going to show itself to be the deck that we all expected it to be coming into the Stellar Crown format, and I would not be surprised to see Charizard take home the victory. It's got a great Terapagos Dusknoir matchup. Its Palkia Dusknoir leaves a bit to be desired, but especially if you can play the Manaphy, you can punish some slower starts, and if you get to go first, you can win that matchup very easily. So looking to see big things from Charizard Pidgeot. Terapagos Dusknoir is going to maintain its place in A tier. I don't think it's as good of a play as it was maybe for the Kentucky regional, but I still think Terapagos Dusknoir is one of the best decks in the format. I still don't think it has any matchups that are worse than like a 40-60, other than maybe Regidrago with that Noivern, but again, I'm not expecting too much of the Regidrago to be playing that. So Terapagos Dusknoir, just for its sheer amount of power, how oppressive it can be, how strong the deck is as a whole, it's going to maintain its spot in A tier. Regidrago is going to be our first deck in B tier here. I said Regidrago is a great play for Louisville. I think it's a little bit worse of a play for Lille with how well Raging Bull did, how many high tier players played the deck, I'm expecting a surge not only in Raging Bolt, but in good players playing Raging Bolt. And when you have a solid player piloting Raging Bolt, there's almost no world where Regidrago is going to be able to win that matchup unless you're playing the Super Scoop Up with the Noivern. But if you're playing that, then you don't have Prime Catcher. A lot of your other matchups become quite a bit worse. So Regidrago going to sit in that B tier for right now. Lugia, we're putting it right back in the S tier. I think Lugia is kind of going to maintain its place in the S tier for quite some time in this format. Lugia is an incredibly strong deck. It has very, very good matchups into all of the other top decks. If you even like a high roll a little bit, the deck can just kind of steamroll over every single deck in the format. It's one of the very few decks that has a positive matchup into the Raging Bolt Ogerpon, as well as the Regidrago, as well as the Charizard. It beats control archetypes. It's got a good Palkia Dusknoir matchup. It has a solid Lost Box matchup, depending on the list. So I expect Lugia to maintain its place as an S tier deck. Again, it pains me to say I'm not a huge Lugia fan, but it does seem to be continuing this sort of dominance that it's had. We've had no top 8s this season without a massive Lugia representation. We now have our second double top 8 finisher with the exact same 60 that they had already topped 8 with this season. So I expect Lugia to maintain its place kind of at the top of the heap. Palkia Dusknoir is going to move down a bit. We're going to put Palkia Dusknoir in the A tier here. I think the biggest thing that is wrong with Palkia Dusknoir, again, it's the same thing as Regidrago. Raging Bolt, specifically Raging Bolt with Bravery Charms, is a difficult matchup for Palkia. You can certainly do what Ian Robb did and play Klefki as a way to kind of try and stall them in the early game to start off on the right foot, but this matchup, by all account, is very difficult for Palkia. I expect it to be more popular. The Lugia matchup is still quite difficult for Palkia. Your Regidrago matchup is difficult as well. Your Lost Box matchup is pretty coin flippy, so I am expecting Palkia Dusknoir to be a strong play. I think it could very easily be one of, if not the best deck in the format, so I still expect it to put up numbers. I do think that the meta is a little bit worse for it now than it was in Louisville, but I still expect it to be a very strong deck. Dragapult Pidgeot. It pains me to do this. I'm going to put Dragapult Pidgeot. Actually, you know what? This is Pidgeot, not even Dusknoir. I'm going to put Dragapult Pidgeot in the D tier. I'm assuming Dragapult Pidgeot, for the sake of this list, means that there's no Dusknoir. I know some of the Pidgeot lists have been playing Dusknoir, but it's a thinner line. I simply don't think that this deck is fast enough to keep up with the meta. That's my opinion. You've got a tough Raging Bull Ogerpon matchup. If you're not playing the sort of Turbo Dragapult, you're going to struggle against all of the Turbo decks, Terapagos, Palkia Dusknoir, and while you may boast like a decent matchup into Charizard Pidgeot, it's still very losable. Dragapult Pidgeot, to me, it doesn't seem like there is a lot going for it. It seems like of the decks that I've already put on the tier list, the only good matchup for the deck is Charizard Pidgeot. They're kind of unfavored into everything else, so I'm not a big fan of that for this tournament specifically. Iron Thorns. I do think Iron Thorns could be a decent play for the Lille Regional Championships. I think Iron Thorns is very good into a lot of the decks that we expect to see a higher play rate. Raging Bolt can definitely beat you. I mean, really any deck other than Lugia can beat you. But I do think you have a solid Lugia matchup. You have a solid Charizard matchup. The most successful Zard lists have not been playing Canceling Cologne. The most successful Raging Bolt lists have not been playing the Fluttermane, but they have been playing Slitherwing, which could cause some problems for the Thorns. So I think it could actually be C tier. Going through that, I think there's a world where Iron Thorns is C tier, just talking about it, because I think you lose to Palkia. I think you lose to Terapagos more often than not. I think if we assume that people are going to copy Caleb's list, I think you lose to Bolt. Your Drago matchup is close, but not easy. Your Charizard matchup is close, probably favored, but not incredible. So I think we'll put Thorns in C tier for right now. And we're going to put Gardevoir right alongside it in that C tier. I tried to play it to Louisville. On my last tier list video, I put it in C. I said the best way to play it was the Henry Chow Turbo list, and then I brought it to the championships, and I got donked 7 out of 14 of my games. So I don't think Gardevoir is in the best spot right now. If you are specifically Henry Chow, I totally get it. Continue to play the deck, continue to rock with it, but I think almost anyone else is going to be struggling to see some success with the Gardevoir right now. Next up, we have Dragapult Dusclops. I'm going to go ahead and put that in B tier. I do think it's a much better play than Dragapult Pidgeot. Dragapult Dusclops has a little bit more keep-up potential than the Dragapult Pidgeot does. There's less setup that's necessary. You're going to be more comfortable going first because you're not as reliant on that Arven. We saw this deck win Dortmund. I think it is still very, very strong. You know, you have a decent shot into Lugia. You have a good Charizard matchup. Your Raging Bolt matchup leaves a bit to be desired. Your Terapagos matchup is good. Your Palkia matchup, again, leaves a bit to be desired, but I don't think it's a bad play. I think that's the way we're going to put it. I don't think it's a bad play. I could see Dragapult Dusclops being pretty solid for this event, so I'm going to leave it in the B tier for now. Snorlax Stall is also going to go into that B tier. I think Snorlax boasts a very, weird matchup spread going into this tournament. I think you take... It's a matchup roulette deck, right? Whether Snorlax is going to succeed is ultimately going to depend on what matchups you see. If we assume a lot of Charizard, that's generally speaking a decent matchup for Lax. If we expect a lot of Lugia, that's generally speaking a bad matchup for Lax. I do think the Slitherwing and Raging Bolt is a bit more problematic for Snorlax than something like the Sandy Shocks is, because Slitherwing does one-shot the Mimikyu with the Bravery Charm. So I think Snorlax is a solid B tier deck. I do think that Pidgeot Control is worse than Snorlax, so I'm going to put it alongside there in the B tier here. I do think Pidgeot Control has a worse Raging Bolt matchup than Snorlax, but a better Charizard, but a worse Lugia potentially, depending on what you play. So it's kind of back and forth which one is better. I think both of them are about B tier plays for this event specifically. Miraidon's going to go in the D tier. If Louisville was not Miraidon's time, certainly this is not. The higher count of Bravery Charm and Raging Bolt is a bad thing for Miraidon. Charizard resurfacing is a bad thing for Miraidon. So even though Lugia stays at the top, the other aspects I think are going to keep Miraidon down. Turbo Roaring Moon is also going to go into the D tier. It's not a very strong deck right now. It's not very well positioned, so we're going to leave it in the D tier for the time being. Gholdengo is going to go in B tier as well. I do kind of like Gholdengo. Gholdengo boasts very interesting matchups. It has a very good Raging Bolt, a very good Terapagos, a very winnable Charizard Pidgeot, very winnable matchups kind of across the board. Its worst matchups are going to be something like Lugia, something like Palkia, but I think if you hit the right matchups, Gholdengo could have a pretty sick run. I'm going to go ahead and put Lost Box in A tier. I do expect people to build their decks a little bit more to deal with Lost Box going into Lille. I do think decks like Charizard are going to play Manaphy. I think Terapagos will play Manaphy, which is going to be a little bit problematic for Lost Box. But again, Lost Box's worst matchup is Regidrago. Regidrago's worst matchup is Raging Bolt Ogerpon. And so if we expect Raging Bolt to push Regidrago a little bit further in terms of play rate out of the meta, I do think Lost Box could have another very solid tournament. And then Ancient Box is just going to go right into that D tier. Sorry to the Ancient Box enjoyers. It's just not very good right now. You have a struggled Charizard matchup. You're going to struggle with Lugia. You're going to struggle with basically everything on the list. You might beat Palkia. You'll have a good Lost Box matchup. So actually, maybe Ancient Box isn't that terrible. Maybe we'll put Ancient Box in C just to appease the Ancient Box enjoyers. I don't think it's the worst deck you could play. You have a good Raging Bolt matchup. Your Terapagos matchup is probably about 50-50, but they can do a lot if they're able to get Dusknoirs in play. So I'm not going to put Ancient higher than this. But yeah, I will be right back with these decks ordered in the tiers so we can take a look at what I think the actual rankings are as well. All right, here you have it. Number one deck going into Lille Regionals, in my opinion, is that Charizard Pidgeot. I really think Charizard is going to do great over in France this weekend. You know, historically, the best Charizard players are from Europe and Brazil, and so I would not be surprised to see Tord Reklev rolling up with a Charizard deck and just steamrolling the whole event. This is my prediction. I think these are the two best plays for the tournament. In A tier, we still have Palkia Dusknoir at the top of that A tier. I might be underestimating Raging Bolt Ogerpon a little bit. I did take a lot of time deciding between these two for second place in A tier, but I think it's pretty interchangeable between the two of them, with the Lost Box hitting the end of the A tier there. In B tier, I have Regidrago leading the heap. You know, Regidrago's got a good Charizard matchup. It's got a decent Palkia matchup. Obviously, your Lost Box matchup is very, very good. But you have a coin flippy Terapagos, you have a bad Lugia, you have a bad Raging Bolt. And like I said, I do expect the Raging Bolt to be the most played deck. So Regidrago going to sit at the top of B tier. I've got the two, the Stall and Control archetypes just below the Regidrago, just because I'm not too impressed by Dragapult Duscnoir and Gholdengo's matchup spreads. Gardevoir at the top of C tier is mostly personal bias, and anything below that you probably shouldn't be considering at this point. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching the video. If you agree with my tier list, please be sure to let me know down below. You can leave a like, and if you really enjoy my content, please go ahead and subscribe. But yeah, until next time, I'll see you later.